ladies and gentlemen, I feel greatly honored and privileged to be invited to speak before such an esteemed audience. Today, I am here to share with you the challenges to the democratic transition that delayed the fulfillment of the People's Dream in Zimbabwe's historic election in 2008. 4 years ago, on the 29th of March 2008, Zimbabwe went to an election in which the people largely enjoyed some semblance of freedom to elect a leader and a party of their choice. My party, which I lead, the Movement for Democratic Change, and I won that election, as you may recall. Even the announcement of the results 5 weeks after the people had cast their vote failed to douse the people's exuberance after 20 years of President Robert Mugabe's rule. The results published by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission after 1.5 months indicated that even though I had won the election, I had just fallen short of garnering 50% of the votes and we had to go for a runoff. We had our misgivings about that contrived result, but while we prepared for the runoff, there was so much state-sponsored violence by the army and other security agencies against the people. My party and I had no option but to pull out of that runoff. We were simply not prepared to walk our way into office, stepping on dead bodies and grave. Mr. Mugabe contested against himself in a one-man race that was dismissed by SADC, the African Union, and the broader international community as illegitimate. Negotiations brokered by SADC led to the formation of a coalition government in which I am Prime Minister and Mr. Mugabe is President, despite the fact that I had won the credible election on 29th March 2008. In short, I had won an election, but there was no transfer of power. A people's transition to full democracy was therefore thwarted by a few individuals at the helm of the national security institutions who felt that their privileges were under threat. What torpedoed the people's will as expressed in an election were individuals who abused national institutions because they felt it was necessary to mete out violence for their own personal ends. I want to stress from the outset that our problem was never the rank and file of the army, the police, and the central intelligence officers, most of whom I know are committed to upholding the Constitution and are patriotic Zimbabweans. But it was individuals who felt personal interests were threatened, whatever those interests were. Our experience in the past 4 years has been a mixture of progress and impediments. We've managed to stabilize the economy, termed hyperinflation conditions, and given people the reason to hope again. But we have largely failed to implement the reforms that we agreed under the supervision of SADC. Reforms that we agreed would create a conducive environment for the holding of free and fair elections that should end this coalition. These include media reforms, a new voters' roll, most importantly, security sector realignment. This was meant to realign our security sector to the democratic culture, respect for multipartyism, and the respecting of the people's will. The media, particularly the public media, have failed to reflect the new spirit of inclusiveness. They have become a new arsenal to malign and to vilify me and my party. The public media have become the purveyors of hate speech and sowed divisions, disunity, and disharmony in our society. The electoral reforms that have gone through Parliament should go further so as to guarantee the security of the person, the security of the vote, and the security of the people's mandate. Nothing should ever be allowed to stand in the way of the people's will. And now that we have become a global village, the world should not stand by while gun-toting musketeers instill fear among innocent civilians wishing to elect their leaders and political parties of their choice. Some of the individuals in the security sector have already publicly stated that they will not accept the result of the next election unless President Mugabe is guaranteed a win. It is largely this intransigent attitude of some in the security services, violence and non-movement in some reforms that largely threatens the prospect of a free and fair election in Zimbabwe. In other words, we face the possibility of yet another challenge to our democratic transition in the next election. But suffice to say, I'm an optimist. I was giving a lecture in Japan on Friday just recently, and I told the government that we have moved from Afro-pessimism to Afro-optimism, underpinned by a brave progression towards democratic governance. Our negative history as a continent and as an individual countries has not blinded us to the new opportunities and the prospect of a new era of our people. I am convinced that our resilience and our record as a revolutionary people will ensure that we overcome the current threats to a peaceful transition. Southern Africa Development Community and Africa continue to nudge us towards a peaceful election. There is a concerted effort in SADC and Africa to ensure that democracy once again is restored in Zimbabwe. The new constitution, which is part of the agreed roadmap, and which has now been agreed between the parties, amongst the parties, is expected to mitigate against the excesses of these security establishments. There is fear that Mugabe and his party may veto the proposals. This exercise was never about an individual or an individual party, and therefore the constitution can only be submitted to the people through a referendum for its ultimate legitimacy. Section 11 of this new constitution, handed over to the principals last week, demands that the police, the intelligence services, the army, and the correctional services must act in a non-partisan manner. No serving member of the security sector can serve in a political party. The constitution, which will be subjected to a referendum in the near future, demands that members of the security service must support themselves to the civilian authority of the country. Moreover, the service chiefs must now serve for a maximum of 2 5-year terms, which is a major improvement from the current constitution where they had no term limits and were serving members who were active in the ZANU-PF structures. While the new constitution may not cure all ills, we believe it is a major starting point and an improvement on the status quo to introduce democratic culture of accountability, transparency, and non-partisan service to the people. The people of Zimbabwe have come this far, and I am convinced that we are in an unstoppable and irreversible transition, a transition which is both political and generational. I wish to conclude by making a plea to all of you to be the global warriors of peace and nonviolence. Spare a thought for the people of Zimbabwe and join the global movement for a peaceful election where the people will be free to elect their leaders of their choice in a free and fair and credible election. Pray for the exorcism of the demon of violence so that the people's vote will count and no one stands between the people and their legitimate aspiration. I know that our daily frustrations as a people will not blind us to a bright future, and that death is in the horizon. The resilient people of Zimbabwe are ready for nothing but a free and fair election, and I am hoping that after the referendum, such a date will then be set for that election. A false impression has been created that some of us are against these institutions. We have nothing against these institutions as long as they stick to their mandate, protecting and not harming the people. Unarmed civilians can never be a threat to national security. So we simply aim for a free and fair election where losers hand over power and winners claim victory, but magnanimous in ensuring that stability is assured by all in the country. We must, as a continent, embrace democracy and create and ensure those institutions that protect and promote the freedoms of ordinary citizens. The challenge for us, the new crop of African leaders, is to shun repression and misgovernance and to create a new society with new values. We are a new generation which must focus on building strong economies, creating jobs, and developing a qualitative and affordable social delivery system, especially in the fields of health and education. We must embrace ICTs and become part of the global village. The ICTs will enable us to realize our full potential and bring all citizens to the same level of development. This is our vision as a country to bring stability, security, unity, and peace and development to the people of Zimbabwe, and indeed to the wider Africa. I won the last election, but there was no transfer of power because President Mugabe had the guns, while I had the people's mandate. We cannot allow guns and bullets to be superior to the people's sovereign will. And as a country and as a people, we drive our hope from the experiences of our African brothers in Senegal, Zambia, and Malawi, that it is possible to turn over a new leaf through a peaceful transition despite the torturous and painful history. I believe that with the support of SADC, the AU, and the global international community, and our own efforts as a country, we have to find each other, and we'll be able to lay the basis for a new Zimbabwe. And like I've always said, a new Zimbabwe is possible in our lifetime. I thank you for your attention.